morning, everyone. We welcome you to our Roundtable. Today is Sunday, July 9th, 2017. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent in Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. This morning, I will begin with a prayer from Watches, Prayers, and Arguments by Mrs. Eddy. God is with you, and God is truth. So you have it. Truth right with you every hour, and never can be without truth. And truth is telling you just what to say and what to do, and how to do all that is good. May the love that guards its own and owns all make you happy without any other companion. And this is from the notes. This is from the notes of Joseph G. Mann, his class notes of 1923. The Master said that but one thing is needful, and that was to sit at his feet. Mary has chosen the better part. One thing needful, in the most impersonal light that we can put it, is to know or understand God. I should put it as radical as that. Nothing in the world is so necessary to us and the welfare of the world as to understand God. This class today, as we are assembled here, is of more value to the world than all the worldly councils put together, national or international. This is the estimate I put upon it. Our awakening to the understanding of God will mean more to the world for good than all that we hear about economics the world over, or what the world calls business, because we are going to touch the hem of sincerity, and that is more than you will find in the world. We are going to be actually sincere. Now, I wanted Linda to mention a little bit about what she read about Joseph Mann. Is Linda?
I'm here, but I'm not sure what specifically.
Well, first, how he was introduced to Christian Science, and then about his father.
Okay. Joseph Mann is mentioned in some of the books published on healing, but it was not in the journal, but he was healed of a gunshot wound when he was in his 20s. It was a shot in the heart. He was in this was in the 1890s, I believe. And he was on his deathbed, and he was actually probably moments from death. And his father was already preparing telegrams and letting people know that he was dying, or really was announcing his death. And a neighbor, I believe, was a Christian Scientist and came in, and Joseph was healed. And his dad rejoiced greatly. I mean, he was in tears when his son was dying before him. And then when he was healed, he was rejoicing in tears for his son's recovery. But what was interesting was Joseph Mann immediately embraced Christian Science and wanted to do for others what had been done for him. So he immediately took up the practice. And then his father became antagonistic toward it. And I just thought it was very interesting that here he watched his son come back to life before his eyes and then fought against him practicing Christian Science. And Joseph Mann made a stand and told him that he was not going to back down from his work with Christian Science, and that if I don't know what happened in the end, but he left his dad for a week and said, "You can think about this. I'm going to go away and come back." And I gathered when he came back, the father still was not accepting or supportive of the Christian Science, but Joseph Mann continued all his life in this, and he was a very powerful example of being steadfast and faithful to this Christian Science and to how Mrs. Eddy intended it to be practiced. But he did help his father, and he sat by his side when his father was passing, and was able to comfort and bring a lot of peace and love through his understanding of Christian Science. But I just thought it was an important story because you can't make people want or accept it, even if they see dead raised before their eyes. And you have to stand for your highest right and move forward. That's what I got out of it.
Absolutely. Thank you. I thought it was such a strong point that we all must see and understand. And that is, I mean, here's someone who saw literally the raising of the dead and was so grateful. I mean, it had his son restored to him, and yet still resisted and wasn't interested in the science. So all of this wondering, why, well, stop it. The human mind will not get it. And until the human mind is transformed and has perhaps brought to the brink themselves of some tragedy, maybe then they'll be ready for it, or maybe not. But that is not our business or concern. We mustn't let it take our testimony or our joy or enthusiasm for this truth. And marching on, as I often refer you to, Mrs. Eddy's article on the allegory. And if you're interested in these class notes, they come from the David Keaston website, or you can ask Jeremy about it so you can download them for yourself. And anyone who finds a short and appropriate prayer or prayers for the beginning of these roundtables, please send them either to me or Lauren before Sunday. I would appreciate that if anyone finds anything they find very inspiring and meaningful. Okay, our lesson subject today is sacrament. Golden text, 1 John 3. Little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth. So who figured out the theme of the lesson?
Obedience.
Yes, obedience and not talking but living. I thought it was what Carthens wrote on the forum, that sacrament was an outward and visible sign of inward spiritual grace. And he goes on to say that Mrs. Eddy talks about that inward sign as being healing the sick and raising the dead, all of those things. This is what true sacrament is. It's the living of it, not just the material symbol. Anyone else? Is Jeremy here now?
I am.
Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about the responsive reading. The whole Bible section is really, we're not leaving you hanging here as to how to live this truth. It's very, very specific on the deeds and things to do. And the first in Romans, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Any comment on that? How do you do it?
I feel that we have to accept this truth that's been given us, that we are spiritual, and from that can we work correctly. I mean, present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God. Certainly, it's not talking about the mortal body. So there's a truth here that we are being asked to accept.
One of the basic concepts in Christian Science is self-immolation. There's no selfishness here. And to me, I think that's what one of the main sacrifices is. With that being done, it makes it much easier to feel the power and presence of God and be His reflection. And one of the things I think about obedience is that it's really another name for reflection. It's about the whole idea of feeling God's guidance and impulse and going accordingly. So, like the definition for life.
Okay, thank you.
I like that living sacrifice part because it's a reminder to daily do what God's telling you to do. Not just once in a while, not just Sunday, but every day.
And what is it that we're supposed to sacrifice?
Sin, disease, and death.
Yeah. Sacrifice selfishness. Sacrifice self-love. Sacrifice self-righteousness. All the self.
Personal attachment.
Excellent, yes.
I was thinking of that when Linda was talking, that Joseph Mann's father thought he was losing that personal attachment to Joseph Mann's death. And then when he got him back, he thought he had him again. And then he lost that personal attachment to Christian Science after that.
It's a demand to go up higher. And if people want to cling up to you in a personal way, you will find it obnoxious, frankly. You will feel their thought holding you in a personal, clinging way, and you can't allow it. Now, the hymn number 324 we posted on the website, and I mentioned it in my testimony because it meant so much to me. And this is presenting your body as a living sacrifice. So what if you're having a problem with, say, your hands? How do you present it as a living sacrifice? This does apply to us right here, right now, our bodies. You're having a problem with your hands. So what do you know about your hands?
It belongs to God. It's God's. God is life. All of it is His. So
The hand is to be used in His service, to be used for God's purposes.
to show His glory.
That hymn says, "Take my hands and let them move at the impulse of thy love." So you think if you're using your hands in that way that you're going to have trouble with them? Maybe you need to ask yourself, how are you using your hands? Or how are you thinking about your hands or your service to God? What if you're having trouble with your throat?
Are you singing praises to Him? Are you using it to praise Him, to glorify Him?
Absolutely. Praise Him, praise Him. Praise the everlasting King. That's what your throat is for. Maybe you've been grumbling with your throat.
It's a good opportunity to ask what's been coming out of your mouth.
Exactly.
And you might want to say, would God have said this?
Yes.
Remember, it's not what goes into your mouth, but what comes out of your mouth that defileth a man, to quote.
So what have
How
I...
we express love. It says, "Take my lips and let them be filled with messages from thee."
Thank you. Yes, I just love this hymn. Go ahead, Florence.
No, it's just essentially what she said is, what have I been speaking? What does my conversation entail? Is it, what do I talk to myself? What do I say most of the time? Is it gossip? Is it, anger? Stuff like that. Is it holy?
Is it holy? Is it helping others? Is it helping yourself? Watch it. Watch your thoughts. Laura gave me this article. She showed me it was a one on psychology, but it was about the tendency of the human mind to be negative. I think it goes back to, what was it, last week or the week before, we talked about how it's so hard to think correctly. Well, in the human mind, it is hard. Everything is negative. You just see the glass half empty all the time, and you talk about it. Well, and in this article, it says that, you have to make a real effort to see the good. And I burst out laughing because the conclusion of this, whoever it was, psychiatrist said, well, you really should write a journal with a happiness list and a grateful list. So, I mean, it's certainly what we talk about week after week here. But one of the main, most important points is yes, you can be thankful for the thing, whatever, your family, house, whatever, but what truly do you need to be thankful for?
Life, truth, and love. That's good.
Yes.
Yes, for the presence and power of God.
Because if you are not seeing God as the giver of all good, then you've missed everything. And you're liable to lose it. Only when you see it is coming from God, the source of all good, who is ever present, that it becomes glorious. It just becomes absolutely glorious, and it is heaven on earth. And to be constantly acknowledging his presence and grateful every moment of the day for the good that's constantly around you will do more for you than anything else. And that's a paraphrase from Mrs. Eddy. But it takes discipline. And if you've been in this big habit, as someone mentioned a week or so ago, and we talked about this, a big habit of seeing everything wrong and taking the negative spin on everything, you have to work at it. It's not handed to you on a silver platter, nor can you call a practitioner and expect it to all go away. It's hardly fair. You've got to do it. This hymn says, "Take my every thought to use in the way that thou shalt choose."
I know in Mrs. Eddy's wonderful article, Fidelity, she talks a great deal about the work that you have to do. She describes how a musician has to practice and anyone has to work.
Yes, thank you. And she does as well in Science and Health. Maybe people like to skip over those parts, but it's something it's required. You have to work at it. So, okay, Jeremy, you go ahead with what you found, some of your definitions.
Yeah, I just have realized since coming here that I don't really know the real definition of a lot of these words. So when I came across dissimulation, I thought I better look that up. And part of the definition was hiding under a false appearance, false pretension, and hypocrisy. So I just was thinking, let your love be without dissimulation. So, let your love be without counterfeit appearance or hypocrisy. And as I went through the definitions, it made it a lot clearer going through all that. Do you want me to read all the definitions?
Well, we'll just take what you've said so far. Now, how could you let your love be with dissimulation? I mean, what are some examples? These things creep in very sneakily. And let's have, a lot of people are listening. Last week we had more than 70 people were on at the Roundtable listening. So let's have more participation for those of you on teleconference.
I'm just thinking of the example from the story in Luke with the priest who, is a priest and I guess would be expected to be loving, but then when he saw the man that was on the side, he just passed by to the other side. So for me, that's something that I have to think about. If I'm saying that I'm so loving, if I were to see someone in need, what would I do? Would I just ignore them and pass by on the other side, or would I, do what I was maybe led to do to help them? I think that's just one example.
Thank you.
What is selective love? Ever known anybody who loves their family so much but doesn't really love necessarily other people's children or other people as much?
I was definitely like that before coming here. I seriously wondered for a long time if I would ever be able to love anyone other than, my kids or maybe one or two other people. So, and I actually was realizing the other day, driving down the street, I had honest affection for everybody I was driving by, and what a difference that was. And it's only possible because of coming here and learning Christian Science.
How much more free you feel when you're loving this way, instead of that limited, selective love, so-called love.
The difference between that and being competitive, trying to compete with other people.
It's a very good point. That just ruins everything. Absolutely ruins everything. You know, how can you love when you're competing, when you're looking at the neighbors in a competitive way, that they either have more or less than you, or their children go to better schools than you, or than your children, or whatever creeps in. Competitiveness is a sin.
It's hatred.
It is. It's encouraged in our society. And I remember when we first came here, Gary was extremely competitive. And frankly, I think we were shocked when Mrs. Evans came after it so strongly because, as I said, it's encouraged in our society to compete. What do they say? Who do you compete with?
Yourself.
Yourself. Be the best that you can by God. But to compete with others, you're automatically putting in a sense that you're either better than them or inferior to them. And that is not, is that Christian Science?
No.
No.
So you watch it, and you watch it, you know, with the sports and with your children. That's why that movie, Chariots of Fire, is such a beautiful one, because it deals with this topic.
But it goes with a human sense of love, doesn't it? Because when you're competing, you're measuring people by human standards instead of seeing their divinity and seeing God at work. It's a totally different picture.
But if you're thinking that way, you're really also seeing yourself wrongly. You can't but.
Absolutely. You're saying everything wrong when you see it humanly.
It makes you very insecure, too. Competitive people are insecure because they feel like if they're not the top A student, or if they don't win the next marathon or whatever else, they're no good. It drives a person. Yet it's commonly accepted.
And it leaves them in an uncomfortable position. Because if that's their concept of life, that they're never going to be totally happy. They're always going to be in fear of losing it. That's why I love to quote St. John, perfect love casteth out fear. Until you get above any human sense of measuring anything humanly as to whether it's yourself or any other person, you have to get above the human and get rid of it. And for a lot of us, it's, it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, I had to have it burned, literally burned out of me. I was so steeped in the human when I got here. It was a painful, burning process. I thank God that Mrs. Evans had the courage and the love to do it.
It's very difficult if you are a spiritually minded person, too, to be with someone who is competitive. They will be looking you over, judging you, and everything is, they're measuring in a human sense. Now I have to smile to myself sometimes. Now they have this other extreme where, you have any kind of event, and everyone gets the prize. No one wins. Heaven forbid anyone wins. That's terrible. Well, I think that is an extreme, too. But I think that you reward effort and good work, but you just keep it in subjection to the truth and God, and not getting carried away either one way or the other. I don't know if there's any comments on that, but
Well, what's the right attitude toward any kind of gamesmanship or business or just any other activity, if you will, in life? What's the right attitude?
You just strive to do the best that you can.
You're expressing God. You're expressing what's been given, for everyone. You are expressing it. The ability to do something and do it rightly to the glory of God.
Exactly. And everybody has their own place. And nobody can ever have the place that is supposed to be for someone else. That's why envy, competitiveness, all of that stuff is totally worthless, worse than worthless. Because each one of us has a place.
God-given place.
That nobody else can fill. And each one of us has something to do for God that will be satisfying.
And if you run a race and you were the last one, who cares? You did the best you could. Enjoy it. I mean, who cares, really? They used to have this saying, 90 years from now, is anybody going to care about what happened? Not really. As long as you had fun and did the best that you can, that's all that matters. And if you don't care for that kind of thing, which I happen not to, then don't do it. But if you enjoy it, then let it just be something you enjoy to do for the glory of God and for no other reason.
I know for me, coming here and realizing that, we're all in this together, that was a really important thing. But also realizing that a blessing doesn't take from one to give to another. Blessings are for everybody. That was a really important lesson.
Thank you. What blesses one, blesses all, as Mrs. Eddy says. Yeah, you can't take a blessing from someone else. And if you try, well, you put yourself in danger. If you haven't seen that movie, Chariots of Fire, it's a wonderful one to see. So, and another form of love being a dissimulation, counterfeit, or hypocrisy, make sure what you say is as truthful as it possibly can be. None of these have truth. It's so easy to speak one way with one person and another way with someone else, rather than being your true self as God made you. That's very liberating. If you're with people that are doing things you don't approve of or like, well, either leave or speak up. Say you don't do that. You don't like it. Don't compromise yourself. Oh, it's so exhausting not to be yourself. Do what God made you. Oh, hymn again. Take my love, O Lord, I pour at thy feet its treasure store. I am thine, and I will be ever, only, all for thee. Abhor that which is evil. What's abhor, Jeremy?
Abhor is to hate extremely or with contempt, to loathe, detest, or abominate.
Whoa, think of that. Nice little Christian scientist. That's how you have to feel toward it. That he says you're a terror to error. What if you were not? What if you're neutral?
Tolerant.
Yeah, good word.
You're allowing him to breed and grow.
You are.
Right. And there are those who think that that's the Christian way, right? To be tolerant. Sorry.
Now the Bible tells no lukewarm. Don't be lukewarm.
Exactly.
That's exactly right. It shows you really don't care. You're in a zombie state. Who else is going to talk?
Oh, this is Betty. Could I ask a question? I love that you're talking about this because it was really with me this morning about dissimulation and guile. And could we talk about those of us who came from a household or a family in which the mother was competitive with the kids and was really hanging on and not letting them go, and how to deal with that, and not loving the mortal, but somehow trying to get what love is in the face of not having seen the real thing.
Yes, mother love can be really damaging, can't it?
Oh, it's just a false sense of love. Luann, do you want to speak to this?
I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Oh, I mean, you grew up in a home where love was not expressed.
It wasn't expressed verbally or physically, so I didn't know much about love. I knew that, like, I was told I had to say I love you, but I didn't really know what it meant. So, that's all
In a circumstance like that, when you're a child, it is very difficult. So you can only do the best you can. When you get older and know better, if you still have contact with that person, you either don't have contact or you have to correct it, because it can be very toxic and poisonous, especially when you're learning the truth. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on this.
No, I struggle a lot with my family now, my brothers and sisters, because I've changed. I know I've changed, and they still see me the same way. So, like you said before, when they're always saying things like, well, you didn't think that way before, or, who do you think you are, and, things like that. When I do attack the alcoholism and the things that are in my family, they respond very harshly to me for that. But that is my way of showing them love, by getting that alcoholism and the things that they do out of them.
Almost in everything, I have that too in my family. They see you they kind of put you in a box, and they expect you to have those behaviors or those acts that you did at one time, and they're no longer part of you, or in the family as well. And it makes for very difficult relations and to keep some kind of harmony. At least I find it that way. I guess all families are like that. In a way, they want not for you not to deviate from their comfort zone, and just they know you this way, and they expect you to always be that way.
And the way they know you is not positive or good, and that's what confronted some of us. And they don't give room for growth and change. So
that's when you have to decide when it is so uncomfortable to be with them. Then we've all had to come to that decision here, where many of us stopped seeing family relations for that reason. You do everything you can to help, to correct, to love, but if there's a refusal there, just as with Joseph Mann, then you make it clear that you're on two different trains, as Mrs. Eddy says in Science and Health. They're going up to California and you're going to Europe, and there's just no meeting. And both Bruce and Gary grew up in very competitive homes, and it caused Gary to be competitive. It caused Bruce to what? Is he still there?
Yeah, to be regressive, because I was on the other end of the spectrum where I didn't do well in competitive situations, so I went to the opposite end. But even that, Christian Science brought me out.
Yes, it drove both of them to science. Both of them I mean, Gary moved 3,000 miles away to get away from all of that, and so did Bruce. And they cut their ties in many respects. They had to in order to grow. And, you know, maybe after you get strong enough and can maybe help again, and which is sort of what's happened with them as well, where they can help these people if they want to be helped. But there's no nicing this, Betty. Read the allegory, what Mrs. Eddy says about it. You've got to fish or cut bait. Any other comments?
Mary?
Yes?
Hi. What is the main person in the family is an alcoholic and it's very stressful? Is it the same idea? You cut the ties or you limit your interaction? I mean, it's very stressful and it's full of burden because the main event, the main character is the mother, you could say. And it's just been very, very difficult throughout the years. How do you reason with an alcoholic?
You don't.
You can't.
You don't. But in science, as you become a Christian scientist, the main person in your family is God. God is the father and mother of every one of us. If you have a mother, well, you're on the same plane. You are both God's children. You can see that formerly main person in the family as the child of God. Then you can help them. You don't have to necessarily spend time with them unless they are willing and receptive. But you see them as God's child. And in your thought, and this is where it takes place, it's in your consciousness, you lift them up. Say, right where that, poor mortal seems to be, that enslaved mortal seems to be, is a child of God, and insist in your own consciousness that you see them as the child of God. You will do more for them by mentally doing that than anything you could do. And you don't reason with it. That's a human thing. And human things just don't work. If that person comes to you in a receptive mood, you can be helpful, and God will give you the words to say. But if that person is not receptive, then there's no reason for you to be in their soup or for them to be in your soup. You've got work to do for God. There will be other people that you will be able to help. And that's what we've all found. God is universal, and you have a worldwide mission as a Christian scientist. Do for whoever God brings into your life. People will see what you're doing. And who knows? Maybe someday that person will come to you for help.
And there have been many healings. Mrs. Eddy healed many alcoholics. I was reading about one that I hadn't heard about before this morning, actually. We got a letter from someone that knew Gary many, many years ago. Anyway, I'll read some of that letter perhaps on a Wednesday or perhaps at a Roundtable, but he talked about someone who had known Mrs. Eddy, who had had an alcoholic problem, and was healed just by her presence, by her love. Again, if you're hating the person, you can't heal them. But if you separate that evil of alcoholism from them and know that they are the perfect child of God and can love them, that brings great healing to their lives. And we've had healings in our church of alcoholism. So certainly possible. But if you get upset or resentful or annoyed with them, then that doesn't help. So God will guide you on this. But to abhor the evil is very important. Not the person, but the evil has to be so obnoxious to you, and you have to see it as not them, I've learned to understand what this means. And as you grow in science, evil does become more obnoxious, where you just cannot tolerate it. That's why this idea of tolerating is not science. You do not tolerate evil. You can't. It will eat you alive. So you take a stand and you love the person. Let your heart go out to your dear mother in great love.
And as someone wise once told us, love the hell out of them.
And the hell is the alcoholism or anything else that seems to bind them. Now you have, a much better understanding of science to do this. And sometimes you can do it better when they're not, right in your face or with you all the time. So when you're not with them, Carpenter calls it surplus thinking. Just pour out flood tides of love to her and know that this could never touch a child of God, not the truth about her or anyone anywhere, but abhor the evil. And that alcohol, drugs, all of that, it's rampant in our country because people need to know God.
Thank you, Mary and Gary. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're abhorring evil and then to cleave.
I just wanted to say thank you.
Welcome.
You're welcome. So Jeremy, cleave to that which is good.
Okay, Jeremy left, so I'm going to read his note. And cleave, the definition is to unite or be united closely in interest or affection, to adhere with strong attachment.
So that's what you're doing. And as you're doing that, cleaving to God, holding thoughts steadfastly to Him, cling steadfastly, all the things we read in Science and Health, Mrs. Eddy makes it clear. That's what we're doing. And when you're doing that, you're just feeling God's presence and power with you. The arrow will be obnoxious to you, but you have this fortress strong to cling to. And you remember, in healing whatever it is, alcoholism or whatever the problem, you've got the might and power of Almighty God on your side. Whatever is true about you is true about your mother or your neighbor or whoever else you're dealing with. So, God has made us in His image and likeness, and anything else is a vicious, mesmeric lie that was never the truth. This is how also you can forgive, and that is highly important. You can't help anyone that you have not totally forgiven. Whatever they've done to you, you've got to let it go. Know that it never touched you as God's child.
What's very important for me to do, and that was the healing, was the forgiveness, and then learning to love was a part of that, and it just seemed to come together to love thy enemies. That article, Love Thy Enemies, really helped me a lot because it enabled me to separate the alcoholism from my father, everything else that was going on. It separated and really love the child of God. It was probably the biggest healing I've ever had, and it really helped with everything else followed after that. Once I got rid of all that hate and turned it around into love, and then I could start seeing where God was in my life. Like I gave a testimony on Wednesday. When you look back on certain instances in your life, you can actually see where God was there. Once you have that love in your heart and that forgiveness, and it kind of changes the whole picture of your life. So there's no sadness about my childhood, just places where God was there. That forgiving really turned it all around.
And it's so beautiful. And that is the truth, and that's how it's done. And if anyone came out of a difficult background, it was Luann. And all of the things that were said about her, and she wouldn't even be able to get out of bed, and she built a pottery shop single-handedly last summer. So she refuted all of the lies, and a lot of it was in that forgiveness in her heart. And if she could forgive, as well, Christ on the cross could forgive, Mary Baker Eddy could forgive, we all must forgive. And truly, that article, Love Your Enemies, that has saved me. Can't tell you how many times. You know, Mrs. Eddy has said Science and Health is the healing textbook. Proseworks is the informative, the educational one. Both are important. Of course, Science and Health perhaps is the most, but Proseworks you should know too, and these articles you should live with. And they're wonderful. And I thank God for Mrs. Evans, who showed us the importance of this, the importance of Proseworks. She lived with it and she loved it. So, well, now this is just a little bit of the responsive reading we've gone over, but it shows this is the sacrament that is required of us. And it's in the Bible, but it also relates directly, as we've just talked about, to everything that's in Science and Health. This is the presenting your bodies a living sacrifice to God by just keeping your thoughts stayed on Him. There's a tremendous amount more that I wanted to get to, but we are running out of time. I would if you haven't read this week's Watching Point, it's a very important one on age. It's something beautiful that Mrs. Eddy says about age. And, you know, we were taught here, you can be old at age 20, if you want to call it numbers. When you're curmudgeonly and grumpy and negative, that's old. She talks about having a good sense of humor, not being so involved in self, but thinking of others. All this keeps you ageless. To know daily you are ageless, diseaseless, and deathless because God made you so. So we will go now to our David Keaston article, which I'll have Gary read more of, which is The Importance of Mrs. Eddy's Place. And then the name of the article is What Promotes Healing by David Keaston.
Okay, continuing. To simply say we need more healing is a halfway correct statement. Many of the most inspired accounts concerning our leader have been kept from the field by Mary Baker Eddy's own church, while other subtle but dangerous misrepresentations are promoted as official church views. There is still time to repent and correct this error, to annul this effort of animal magnetism. Will our church be known as fulfilling the prophecy regarding ecclesiastical Babylon, the avenue through which the greatest resistance to the healing truth has come to mankind in this age? The book of Daniel and Revelation speaks of this spiritual wickedness in high places in this end time. It gives one pause to consider what the comment will be upon Christian scientists should they not correct this imposition upon their leader. Quote from 500 Watching Points. Mrs. Eddy gave her revelation to the world in her authorized writings. Then in her life, she gave her own practice or demonstration of this revelation from God. Her life is linked with her revelation in that the latter can never be understood in its fullness without a study and understanding of the former. End quote. Once Mrs. Eddy wrote to a student, I thank God for your faith in Him, with a capital H, and your true sense of me. Why? Because in over 1/4 of a century, I have never in one single instance seen these fail to carry a student safely on in growth and prosperity. But in every single instance, the loss of those mental conditions has wrecked the student. Once I was young and never seen the righteous forsaken, those who are right misled. What Mr. Carpenter writes here merely pens the mirror image of what our leader has already told us in previously quoted passages. We must understand her life and character in their true appearing and spiritual significance to mankind in order to perceive and demonstrate fully her divine revelation from God, which is the promised Comforter, revealed in our textbook, Science and Health.
All right, well, thank you all for joining our roundtable this morning. Thank you for your questions. We're always happy to get questions, so if you have any, bring them. Okay, and we will go on now to our sacrament service. Remember to be giving your whole self to God in His service, and that you will be blessed immeasurably by that.
Which is a totally reasonable thing to do.
Totally reasonable. Don't think it isn't. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.